Harvard has a tremendous reputation around the world. As many of you must have experienced, the mere mention of an affiliation with Harvard often produces compliments or even admirations, especially when one is traveling outside the United States. Over the years, I certainly have received compliments along the lines such as, "You must be super smart. You must be a great scholar," when I was introduced as someone who has a PhD from Harvard or as a member of Harvard faculty. Now, these words were very nice to hear, especially because they're true. But I was not completely satisfied because during these occasions, no one has ever said to me, "You must be a great speaker. You must be a great teacher. Or you must be very good at explaining things." Now let's think about TED Talks. Imagine someone is introduced to you as a TED speaker. Even if you have never heard of this person, it is likely that you will be thinking, this person must have something very interesting to say. This person must be an inspirational speaker. Would it be wonderful if Harvard graduates also enjoyed such reputation? This is why we're gathering here today to launch the Society of Harvard Horizon Scholars. The 8 scholars you're about to hear were selected because of their extraordinary PhD research. Then they went through 6 weeks of intensive trainings on how to present their research ideas to a general audience, that is you. Not in 30 minutes, not even 10 minutes, but in 5 minutes. Indeed, I'm hoping this symposium will go down in history as a 5-minute symposium, because no one will be allowed to speak more than 5 minutes. Not the provost, not the deans, not even the MCs, at least not continuously. On that note, I should hurry to introduce Provost Alan Garber, who will give the first opening remarks. Fortunately for me, the provost needs no introduction. But I do want to mention that Provost Garber is not only an alum of the college, but also of GSAS. Therefore, if his remarks exceed 5 minutes, we can attribute it to the lack of Horizon program while he was here doing his PhD work. Let's welcome Provost Garber.
Thank you very much, Shali. Not only did Shali put actually a 3-minute limit on my comments, I'm supposed to make up for the delay in starting the program. So I'll do my best. Let me just add my welcome to that of Shali. I couldn't be more delighted that we're having this event, and I want to thank Hisa Kuriyama for having conceived of it. We are here today to hear from 8 outstanding scholars, and they will indeed be asked to speak very briefly, presenting their work that they're doing as part of their PhD studies. But I want to add that to me, this event celebrates not only their accomplishments and promise, but those of all of the students of GSAS. The GSAS is at the heart of the university. We all know, all of us in this room, students, faculty, friends, family, we all know what a critical role the students of GSAS play in shaping the life of the rest of the university, and particularly the undergraduate experience. In addition, the graduates of the GSAS populate the world of academia with outstanding scholars in every branch of study and in every part of the world. I may not need to add, many of you may know this, 1/4 of the FAS faculty have PhDs from GSAS, and as Shali mentioned, so do I. So we feel a special kinship. We don't have many occasions to be able to offer you our thanks for all you do. So today, let us not only celebrate the work of these 8 scholars, but of all the students of the GSAS. Thank you for joining us.
Wow, that was not even 2 minutes. Thank you very much. Like Provost Garber, Dean Mike Smith needs no introduction. But I want to take this opportunity to thank him for his strong support to the Horizon programs. In particular, Dean Smith shared his personal speech coach with the Horizon Scholars, and I know the scholars are very grateful for this. Of course, this also means if Dean Smith's remark exceeds 5 minutes, then we can blame it on his PhD education from Stanford. Let's welcome Dean Smith.
Thank you, Jolly. It's a real pleasure to be here and be part of this new event. Excellence is a word often associated with this university. Excellence often describes the strength of our extraordinary faculty and their scholarship. Excellence describes our remarkable college and the enviable residential model. An upper pro of this event, excellence describes each of our PhD students. It is these PhD students that fuel our faculty scholarship. It is these students that help connect our faculty to the undergraduates in the college. And it is these students who are most often found as tutors in the undergraduate residences, making them into true houses. Let me state this unambiguously. The opportunity for undergraduates to interact with PhD students, emerging scholars at the forefront of their fields, is one of the things that truly sets Harvard College apart. Over the last few years, I've had the pleasure of visiting many other institutions as I went around the country with my own children. And on more than one occasion, I heard an admissions officer say, and I quote, "At this college, you can be sure that you will never be taught by a graduate student." Probably not what they were expecting in terms of a reaction from me, but you won't find the alumni of those institutions telling their alma mater's dean just what our alumni have told me. What a joy it was to discuss their ideas, sometimes their crazy ideas, with the world's emerging intellectual thinkers. To our PhD students, those who will be on this stage, those in this room, and of course, those across our campus, you are the faculty of the future. You are the leaders of tomorrow's industries and governments. You are teachers, mentors, role models, and friends to college students. You are an essential ingredient in Harvard's intergenerational learning environment. You are all these things and more. As this program today will prove, you are also innovative, courageous, and curious. You are driven by penetrating questions and tireless in your pursuit of new knowledge. I am pleased and proud to be here today to celebrate these 8 outstanding PhD students. I join President Faust, Provost Garber, Dean Meng, and our entire community in saluting you and your accomplishments. On behalf of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, I thank you for all that you do and look forward to hearing what you have to say today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. So far, so good. The program is running on time. And as President Faust cannot be here today, but she sent us a 3-minute video, which is in itself a great model of how to deliver short, sweet, and powerful speech. So let's enjoy.
Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the first annual Harvard Horizon Symposium. I want to start by thanking Dean Xiaoli Meng for his commitment to the GSAS community and Professor Hisha Kuriyama for his efforts to create this very special event. I also thank the faculty and staff of all of the graduate programs for challenging and supporting students as they pursue the very highest level of scholarly inquiry. The Graduate School of Arts and Sciences represents the purest distillation of scholarship. Central to the school's continued success are the contributions of graduate students who engage every day in the work of developing ideas, deepening understanding, and advancing discovery. Women and men who represent the future of knowledge, and indeed the future of universities. When I welcome graduate students to the university each fall, I speak about how Harvard confronts us with the very highest expectations, how it redefines our aspirations by helping us to understand how very much we can and must ask of ourselves. This symposium is a showcase of ambitious aspirations realized, a celebration of some of the excellent scholarship of PhD students at Harvard. I understand that many students submitted applications and that it was very difficult for the selection committee to make its decisions. I applaud those of you who embrace the opportunity to think about your intellectual contributions in the broadest possible context. Communicating about one's work outside of one's discipline is an essential skill for scholars and researchers in the 21st century. I congratulate the first cohort of Horizon Scholars for sharing their work so compellingly and for achieving a new level of distinction. The women and men you are about to see on screen are persuasive and powerful presenters. They communicate ideas that push the boundaries of what is known, ideas that connect cultures and disciplines, and they convey new insights, new technologies, and new ways of thinking in a manner that is energizing and thought-provoking. In short, their presentations exemplify one of the finest gifts universities give to humanity, individuals capable of making unique and significant contributions to the world of knowledge. Thank you again for joining us for the first annual Harvard Horizons Symposium. Now, let's begin.
The entire Harvard Horizon initiative was a brainchild of Professor Shigenhisa Kuriyama, the chair of the Department of East Asian Languages and Civilization. Professor Kuriyama is one of the most innovative professors on Harvard campus, having introduced multiple initiatives in recent years, including the Harvard Short Film Festival, as many of you probably know. Like Provost Garber, Professor Kuriyama is an alum of the college and of the GSS. But I'm not worried that he will speak more than 5 minutes, because he was the one insist on the 5 minutes limit when everyone else, including me, doubt that would work. With that proper amount of pressure now placed on him, let me turn the podium over to Professor Kuriyama, who will be the moderator for this inaugural symposium. Let's welcome Professor Kuriyama and thank him for a great initiative.
Are you ready? Yes. The scholars that are coming on stage are certainly ready. They've been preparing for several months now to take their complex, cutting-edge research and to translate it into 5-minute presentations that are elegant, engaging, and, dare I say, perfect. But at this moment, I think it's very important that we remember that lectures are, in fact, participatory events. They are collaborations between speakers and listeners. Even the most accomplished speakers can't reach their full potential without the collaboration of their attentive audience. Now, our speakers today are great scholars, they're passionate, they're well prepared, but they're also a little nervous. So I thought it would be good if, before I introduce you to them, or them to you, that we begin by introducing you to them. So I want to ask once more, are you ready? Yes. Are you eager to learn? Yes. will you be the best audience in the history of Harvard University? Then it's my great pleasure to introduce the 8 Horizon Scholars for 2013. Begin in order of our presentations today with Fenna Kreenan, Psychology. Han-Soon Xiong, East Asian Languages and Civilizations. Jeff Teigler, Division of Medical Sciences. Liz Maines Aminzadi, English. Aaron Kwan, Applied Physics. Alex Fatal, Anthropology. Stephanie Dick, History of Science. And Edgar Barroso, Music. So without further ado, I would like to invite Fenna Kreenan, who will give our first presentation on big brain science, strategies for mapping the human brain.
Wow, you guys look great from up here. Though I have to say, when I look out at you, what I see, just hundreds of big, beautiful brains. And it's not just because we're at Harvard, although that might help a little with the big part. Today I want to talk about our connectome. Connectome, that might be a new word for some of you. It's one of the new OM words, you know, genome, proteome, connectome. And the connectome is a set of connections between all the cells in our brain. And the reason that I hope you come away from this thinking about your connectome is it's because something we think about a lot. We think it might give us some insight into what it is about our brain organization that makes us unique, that makes us us. And thinking in terms of networks is really different from how we used to think of the brain. That it was very modular, so each structure performs a specific function in isolation. And so you remember the extreme of this, right? Phrenology, where you measure all the bumps in your head and, oh, that bulge on your forehead, that's just because you're so agreeable. And if you're secretive, it's because of that area tucked back behind your ears. Today we think even the most basic functions emerge from dynamic networks that can change over time and with experience. Okay, so as a connectome enthusiast, I'll be the first to admit we are far from having a map of the human connectome. For one, most of the tools that are available to study connections between brain cells are invasive, so we can't use them in humans. And even if we had the right tools, the brain's massive size is a more fundamental problem. I mean, you guys kind of are the problem. Your brains are too big. So we have one complete connectome constructed. It comes from a worm with 302 neurons. So what are we going to do? How do we make sense of your 100 billion neurons and trillions of connections? So in our lab, instead of tracing the connection between each cell in the brain, we're taking a macroscopic approach. And we're collecting brain scans of thousands of individuals from across the Boston area. So maybe even some of your big brains are in our sample. And we're searching for long-range connections that are sort of like the major highways for information to flow through the brain. So how do we do it? Well, the first thing that you should know is that when regions are connected, they tend to fluctuate their activity in synchrony. And so when we see regions fluctuating in synchrony, we infer they're probably part of the same network. And so this is going on in all of your networks at all times. They're just fluctuating at slightly different rates, and that's how we can tell them apart. So if anyone ever told you you only use 10% of your brain at a time, no, all of your networks, all of the time. And knowing this organization can help us understand how our brain compares to other species. And that's really important because it helps researchers who are trying to, for instance, make models of human brain disorders such as schizophrenia. It helps them to know that certain pathways are conserved across the species they study. So we think that's really important. But we think equally important is to ask the other question, namely, what is it about our brains that make us unique? And it's been a long-standing question in the field. If you took a tiny mouse brain, you scaled it up to the size of a human's, would it have these human capacities? And one place that we've thought about uniqueness a lot is in the cerebellum. That's a small structure in the back of your brain. All vertebrates have one, and so we know from other animals that the cerebellum primarily helps coordinate control of the body maps through its connections with motor cortex at the top of the head. And so we're really excited to show, just by looking for these synchronous networks in human brains, we could find the same evidence for these body maps in the human cerebellum as well. But then we noticed that only a small fraction of the total human cerebellum has these kinds of body maps. And so we wondered, what's the rest of the human cerebellum connected to? Well, it turns out a majority of the human cerebellum seems to have little to do with these body maps or with controlling movement. It seems to have everything to do with these large networks that are involved in higher level cognition of many different forms. And that's really different from the picture that emerged from studying other animals. We just didn't have a good way of looking at human connectivity until now. So that was cool. But just to finish the story, we were recently contacted by an editor from Gray's Anatomy. That's a medical textbook still being used today. He'd seen our cerebellar images. He wanted to use some in a new edition of the textbook. He'd even sent us these beautiful mock-ups that he'd made by hand, which is something I feel only an anatomist would take the time to do. So I was very excited. I ran to wake up my boyfriend. I said, "Ben, you're not going to believe this. They're going to put us in Gray's Anatomy." And he was really happy for me, a little perplexed though. It was only when he asked when the episode was going to air and whether we should try to stream it illegally online that I realized he thought I meant the other Gray's Anatomy. And so if there ever comes a time when we get news of the brain into a primetime TV series, I promise to come back and tell you at a future Harvard Horizon Symposium. Thank you.
So, our next speaker is Han-Soon Seong of East Asian Languages and Civilizations, who will speak to us about textbook enlightenment, Europe, Japan, and the rise of global distance learning, 1720 to 1877.
Thanks to Professor Kuriyama for the kind introduction. But most of all, thanks to all of you for coming here today. All of us here are living through an alleged age of revolution. They say today that you can take a professor, you can put him online, and just by doing so, you can make education truly global, truly universal. You can build a classroom without walls. Now, whether or not all this is actually going to happen or not, I can't say. I'm not a futurist. But I am a historian. And as a historian, my research shows that starting in the 18th century, thinkers, movers, and shakers of all stripes had already begun to say much the same thing. The only difference was that they said it about textbooks. Give a useful textbook to the simplest of men, and they will learn from it. So said the French philosopher Condorcet in the years of the Revolution. But what did he mean by this? Haven't we always learned from textbooks? History, in fact, shows us that this was not the case. The textbook, as we know it, is a fairly recent invention. It comes into being in the second half of the 18th century. Then it rises over the course of the 19th as a new technology. And as a new technology, as all new technologies, the textbook provided society with a new promise and a new hope. The promise that every man, through textbooks, could be their own teacher. No matter who you were or where you were in the world, as long as you had the right textbook, you could all share in the same world of knowledge. It was this that was the first real experiment in distance education the first real attempt to build a classroom without walls. And it's this that my research attempts to trace, trying to understand what effects textbooks had as a global phenomenon in reconfiguring relations between West and East. I start by looking at French and English records from publishers, from charitable societies, from government agencies, all involved in the distribution of textbooks worldwide. But these records here, they can only tell us half the story. The 19th century, for the most part, was an age without much international regulation of copyright. And this meant that it was not only European actors spreading textbooks around the world, but publishers and educators in Asia who took Western books like these and copied them, reprinted them. We find these types of copied materials all across the pedagogical landscape of 19th century Asia. And what this tells us is that what we today would call piracy, what we would brand as illegal copying, was in fact a fundamental and necessary condition of the circulation of knowledge between West and East. But copying is sometimes a strange affair. When knowledge begins to move, it also begins to change. And let me give you one example of what I mean. Consider this primary school textbook in American history. Now, all of you, for 1 second, kind of move out of your bodies and imagine that you were a 19th century Japanese person reading this for the first time. What would you have thought in learning of the story of Thomas Jefferson, one of our great founding fathers? Did you draw examples from his great deeds, his monumental efforts? Perhaps. But for the average Japanese person in the mid-19th century, what would have interested you more is not the story of Jefferson, but the image of his face. This image struck such a chord by itself in some Japanese readers that they copied it and pasted it into this new diagram to represent the 5 races of the world. Thomas Jefferson, for an average 19th century Japanese person, would have meant less as a statesman and more as a representative face of what it meant to be Caucasian. And if you think that's strange, the story doesn't stop here. This image gained such currency and such popularity in Asia that it too was recopied throughout. And with each copy, minor changes came in. The point is this, that by the end of the copying process, you can barely tell what the original was. Copying was also a creative act, an act that created new meanings. Give a useful textbook to the simplest of men, said Condorcet, and they will learn from it. But what he forgot to add was that learning occurs often in strange, new, and unpredictable ways. It's these types of lessons that I think we can apply to our 21st century classroom without walls. For just as we today speak of online technology as creating a new space of knowledge, so too did textbooks as a technology link spaces in Europe to spaces in Asia. So too was the recopying, the reprinting, the pirating of works throughout the 19th century a way in which similar pedagogical materials started to shape a commonality throughout the world. But we must also remember this, that if every man is indeed his own teacher, then what is taught is often not what we originally intended. We must remember that when we take the classroom and break down its walls, we allow knowledge to become unsteady, unfixable. When we set knowledge free, we must also sometimes relinquish our own control. Thank you very much for listening.
Our next speaker is Jeff Teigler of the Division of Medical Sciences, who will speak to us about building better vaccines by learning the language of the immune system.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here today. Wow, those are some tough acts to follow. So vaccines are one of the greatest triumphs of medical science, forever changing the way we view infectious disease. In fact, every year, vaccines are responsible for saving 3 million lives worldwide. And despite this remarkable success, we here all know that making vaccines against some of our biggest challenges has proven intractable. It's kind of a space race of our generation. And so this started me first asking the question, why is it so hard to make new vaccines against some of our biggest diseases? And while the answer to this question is complicated, as it turns out, much of it lies in the point that our current trial and error way of making vaccines really only attacks diseases in one particular way, which is making antibodies that stick to an incoming invader and blocking it from infecting our cells. And while we've been very fortunate that many diseases such as smallpox, measles, and others are vulnerable to this type of attack, we know that this only represents a small subset in a breadth of ways our immune system can fight infections. So what then, if we could harness this wealth of possibilities to make new and powerful vaccines against some of our biggest diseases? And the key to this is a group of proteins known as cytokines. Now, I'm sure everyone here has heard of cytokines. Yes. Just as we use words to convey ideas and meanings to one another, cytokines are the language of the immune system. For example, say you're exposed to a virus. Well, not you in particular. Upon noticing the incoming invader, cells in your body will produce cytokines. And what these then serve to do is they inform different arms of the immune system as to the type, nature, and location of the incoming invader. And importantly, also coordinate how those arms of the immune system will then attack and eliminate the invader. But despite the central importance of cytokines in determining immune responses, they've been largely ignored in vaccine research. And so part of the problem we have in making new vaccines is that we in the immune system aren't speaking the same language. And this is where my research comes in. My work focuses on uncovering the ways the immune system is driven to attack a target in different and powerful ways. And I do this utilizing a panel of experimental vaccines that have shown various levels of efficacy in a model of HIV infection. And the tool our laboratory uses to do this are something called viral vectors. Now, this isn't just a grainy picture of some dice I took over the weekend. These are what are called adenoviruses. They normally just cause the common cold in people. But these are the basic material our laboratory uses to produce viral vectors. And how we do this is we take the virus and then remove its genetic information, and then gut it for whatever makes it normally cause disease in people. In its place, we put a small piece of something we want the immune system to learn how to attack, or a target, and then put these pieces back together and put it back into the virus, turning it into a viral vector. And so these are important in a study done in my laboratory, where vectors built off of several different flavors of adenoviruses were made, but importantly, all telling the immune system to attack the exact same thing. These were then used to vaccinate animals in a model of HIV infection, and then our laboratory looked for protection against disease. And to my surprise, even though we told the immune system to attack the exact same thing with these vaccines, immediately following vaccination, they had very different types of cytokines in their bloodstreams, indicating that their immune systems had been driven to respond to that vaccine in different ways. And furthermore, when we look for protection against disease, these groups of animals had very different levels of protection against disease, also highlighting the point that their immune system had been driven to attack that particular target in different ways. And so the most important part from this study is that those different immune responses weren't caused by the target themselves, but rather were caused by the vectors inducing different types of cytokines in the body, which then drove the immune system to attack that target in different ways, highlighting the point that, as with many things in life, when you're telling the immune system to attack something, it's not just what you say, but it's also how you say it. And so this fundamentally changes how we view vaccine vectors, in that they're not all just passive shuttles, but rather they're all profoundly different from one another. And moreover, they represent a toolbox for vaccine research, in that they all induce their own characteristic types of cytokines, able to push the immune system to respond to the target they're carrying in different and powerful ways. And so this has the opportunity then to completely revolutionize how we view vaccine design, in that instead of just starting from scratch in a trial and error way, we look forward to the time where we can pick the target we want to attack, select from a panel of vaccine vectors that we know give us different types of immune responses against the vaccine vectors or against the targets they're carrying, pick the one that gives us the type of response we want, and then start our vaccine construction from there. allowing us to bypass years of trial and error research, saving millions of dollars, and most importantly, thousands of lives. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Liz Mains-Amendzadeh of English, who will speak to us about macro-realism, how fiction can help us understand a network world.
Thank you. I know it's a sacrifice to be indoors on a day like today, so I'm very grateful to you all for being here. About 5 years ago, I was standing in a Trader Joe's trying to decide whether to buy conventional bananas or fair trade bananas. I think a lot of us have been in these situations that have made us suddenly think about what it means to live responsibly in an interconnected world, a world where many of our everyday goods were grown or made by people far away from us. But what is it that makes us suddenly ask these questions? Sometimes it might be a trip to the grocery store, but sometimes I think it's a certain kind of fiction, a kind of story that we watch or read. I left that Trader Joe's without any bananas, but with a dissertation topic. I started making a list of all the works of fiction that had made me think about how I was connected to people far away from me. My list included everything from novels like The Corrections, to TV shows like The Wire, to movies like Contagion. And then I asked myself what, if anything, these works had in common with each other. Two features jumped out. First, most of them could be described as realism in the sense that they took place in recognizable worlds rather than fantasy worlds. Second, they followed ensembles of characters who weren't always aware of their own interconnectedness. What do I mean by this? These works were very different from something like Jane Eyre that focuses on a single individual. They are also different from something like Girls that focuses on a single social group. Instead, they followed characters living in different parts of a city, maybe in different parts of a globe, but the important point was that these characters often couldn't understand how their actions were influencing each other's lives. But we, the viewer or the reader, could see precisely that. I like to call this genre macro-realism because it gives us a macroscopic perspective onto human relationships. Let me give you an example of how this works in The Wire. In season 4, we meet a character named Randy, who is a student at Tillman Middle School in the northern part of the city of Baltimore. At one point, Randy goes to the southeastern part of the city to meet with Herc, a police detective. A few episodes later, Herc accidentally leaks Randy's identity. Word gets out on the street that Randy is an informant, Randy's house is attacked, and Randy is forced to return to living in a group home. Herc, meanwhile, is oblivious of all of this. He hasn't seen Randy since their initial conversation. But we, the viewer, can see exactly how Herc's careless action shaped the life of this other character. One goal of my work has been to explore this genre of macro-realism by looking at different examples of it. But another goal has been to try to figure out where the genre came from. As I started gathering more examples, I noticed that they were clustering around two different historical periods, the mid-19th century and the turn of the 21st century. It made sense to me why a genre about interconnectedness would be flourishing in our own moment of globalization, an age shaped by a digital communications revolution and the end of the Cold War. But the more I started researching this earlier period, the more I realized that 19th century novelists were just as concerned with the question of globalization, even if they didn't call it by that name. That period, too, was shaped by a communications revolution, the spread of the railroad and telegraph systems, as well as by the politics of imperialism. And for 19th century novelists like Charles Dickens and George Eliot, macro-realist fiction could help their readers imagine how they were connected to people far away from them. Of course, fiction isn't the only thing that can make us think about this question. But fiction often reaches audiences that nonfiction simply doesn't. In fact, David Simon, the creator of The Wire, used to be a journalist for the Baltimore Sun newspaper. At one point, he was asked why he made the career switch from newspaper reporting to TV writing. And he talked about how frustrating it could be to write these exposés for the newspaper and feel like very few people sometimes were paying attention. The Wire, on the other hand, has now found an audience of tens of millions of viewers. He said, "When you somehow tell a story with characters, people jump out of their seats." Fiction, especially when it manages to reach these kinds of larger audiences, can profoundly shape the way that we imagine our world. Specifically, the kind of fiction I've been calling macro-realism can shape how we imagine ourselves as connected to and responsible for people far away from us. People we don't know, people we can't see, people we might never meet. Thanks.
Our next speaker is Aaron Kwan from Applied Physics, who will tell us about graphene nanopores for single molecule DNA sequencing.
Thank you, Professor. 10 years ago, the Human Genome Project was completed, producing the full transcription of our DNA. During the project, DNA sequencing techniques were developed that have invigorated biological and medical research, but the impact on the public has lagged behind. I'll give you an example of what I mean. 1 year ago, my grandmother was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. But with this terrible news, she was given a glimmer of hope, a new treatment called targeted drug therapy. These drugs can inhibit tumor growth without hurting healthy cells, but they only work for certain patients. DNA sequencing was necessary to determine if they would work for her. My grandmother waited 5 weeks for her test results to come back from the lab, a time where the cancer could have been rapidly expanding. In the end, she was one of the lucky ones, and the treatment is working well for her. But it's so frustrating that such a promising technique is so slow to implement. So what makes DNA sequencing so difficult? Our genetic information is encoded in a sequence of chemical bases in long DNA molecules. These DNA bases, labeled A, T, G, and C, are essentially letters in our genetic alphabet. But DNA makes it quite difficult for us. In its natural state, it packs into a ball, like a ball of yarn, making it very difficult to get at what the order of the bases is. How we deal with this today is quite clever, but time-consuming. First, we copy the DNA into many, many copies and cut them into very small pieces, which are much easier to deal with and can be sequenced. When we have enough of these sequence fragments, we can line them up and solve what the original sequence must have been. But all of these steps are so complex and time-consuming that they have to be done in a dedicated laboratory. What if we discovered a way to unravel the DNA and sequence it in one step? Such a single molecule sequencing technique would eliminate all of the expensive and slow steps. You would be able to go to the clinic and have your DNA sequenced while you wait. With sequencing so fast and cheap, we could develop targeted therapies for all sorts of diseases. This, I think, is the promise of DNA sequencing, and it depends on it being fast and cheap. Today, I want to share with you a very simple device that might be able to get us there. It's called a nanopore, and the easiest way to explain it is with a prop. This particular nanopore is so simple that it was made in a third grade classroom. So I have this DNA molecule that I want to sequence. I take this membrane and I use it to separate 2 volumes of salt water so that the pore is the only connection between the 2 sides. I drop the DNA in this side and I use an electric field to suck it through the pore. And this is what happens. It doesn't fit. But here's the amazing thing. The DNA will keep banging around until the end finds the pore. And when it does that, it will thread the pore, unraveling as it goes. And so during this process, and here's the key, the pore sees each of the bases pass by in order. And so we can use this nanopore to solve the problem of unraveling the DNA. But how do we actually read the bases? When I apply the electric field across the membrane, salt ions in solution, like sodium and chlorine, also are pulled through the pore. This constant stream of ions is an electrical current that we can measure in the lab. Now, when the DNA threads through the nanopore, it blocks some of these ions, causing the current to be reduced. The 4 different bases have different structure, and therefore they would block different amounts of current. And so if we could get one base in the nanopore at a time, the blockage would tell us exactly what that base is. We can achieve that with a material called graphene, an extremely thin and strong material discovered several years ago. It's a single layer of carbon atoms arranged in a honeycomb lattice. You can think of it like chicken wire that's strong enough to stop a train. A nanopore in a graphene membrane is so thin that it only fits 1 DNA base at a time. So as the DNA threads through our nanopore, we can read off the sequence directly. Extremely fast and inexpensive single molecule DNA sequencing. If we can get this technology to work, it can enable us to achieve the promise of DNA sequencing, a world where every patient has affordable access to personalized therapies. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Alex Fatal of anthropology, who will speak to us about guerrilla marketing, information war, and the demobilization of FARC rebels.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Kuriyama, and thank you all for being here. Now, this looks like a Revlon ad, right? No. It's really a piece of propaganda from the Colombian Ministry of Defense urging women in the insurgency to trade in their fatigues for heels and transition to civilian life. Guerrilla, feel like a woman again. Demobilize is its main point or punchline. Now, the war in Colombia is the longest running armed conflict in the Western Hemisphere. It dates back to 1964, when the FARC, a Marxist-Leninist guerrilla insurgency, was founded. By 1998, the conflict had come to a boil. In that year, the CIA warned there was a 50% chance the FARC could take power within 10 years. Cut to 2002, and from the embers of a failed peace process rose a counterinsurgency invigorated by nearly $2 billion in US military aid. 2003 is the first year of the program that's the subject of my research, which is the Program for Humanitarian Attention to the Demobilized, or POD, within the Colombian Ministry of Defense. And basically the POD persuades individuals in the FARC to put down their weapons, transition to civilian life. It forgives the political crime of joining the insurgency, and it offers basic social welfare. But, and here's a big but, in exchange It seeks the active collaboration of former rebels in the persecution of their compañeros. That could mean guiding military troops during combat operations or working with intelligence officers to demobilize their friends, helping the military locate rebel stashes of weapons, drugs, or money. One military intelligence officer actually used this gesture to describe the ringing of information from former combatants. Now, is this a better way of extracting intel than torture? Yes, but it very much keeps former combatants involved in the war and exposed to reprisals from the FARC. Now, here's an example of an early piece of propaganda from the POD in 2003, fairly classic propaganda leaflet dropped over rebel areas. And the POD's propaganda becomes more sophisticated, becomes more creative, becomes more targeted in 2007, when the POD contracts the same PR firm that represents Mazda and Red Bull in Colombia. Suddenly, the POD starts bombarding rebel areas with soccer balls with a demobilization message stickered to it. It begins camouflaging the message as a lipstick advertisement. In 2010, this partnership between the POD and this elite PR firm produced a hit, the Christmas campaigns, appealing emotionally to individuals in the FARC to desert and reunite with their families during the Christmas season. Here's a very brief excerpt from the 2010 Christmas campaign. The Christmas campaign was a hit. It really catapulted the POD into international view. Suddenly, they started winning PR awards in Cannes and London. Simultaneously, other conflict zones all around the world, from Afghanistan to the Democratic Republic of Congo, Iraq, to Somalia, began studying Colombia's demobilization program. They see in the Colombian experiment a means of transitioning to peace through a combination of military intelligence and media warfare. Ironically, marketing executives and counterinsurgency strategists are repurposing the tactics of mobility, camouflage, surprise, spectacle, the same tactics honed by guerrilla movements over decades to fight one of the world's longest-running guerrilla insurgencies, the FARC. Now, these guerrilla marketing campaigns radically rebrand the Colombian armed forces and contribute to a broader claim that Colombia is in the midst of a miraculous transformation. At stake in this concerted effort to tell and to sell the Colombian success story is nothing less than a new model for ending intractable political violence, even if that new model has not yet been vetted. Right now, in Havana, Cuba, the Colombian government and the FARC are in the midst of intensive negotiations that could lead to a comprehensive peace agreement, essentially ending 50 years of civil war. If that happens, if the FARC as a group goes from bullets to ballots, and if the Colombian government shifts to a non-militarized way of reintegrating former combatants, then guerrilla marketing may become a new model in conflict resolution. But problematically, this Colombian model conceives of demobilization not as a way of implementing a peace agreement, the way the UN has historically conceived of demobilization, but rather as a means of debilitating an adversary, just one more tool for a counterinsurgency, and then signing a peace agreement on more favorable terms. This paradigm shift has real implications. It blurs the boundaries not only between propaganda and advertising, but also between war and peace. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Stephanie Dick of the History of Science, who will speak to us about aftermath, following mathematics into the digital.
Hi, thank you all so much for coming. I'm really excited to be here today. Throughout history, mathematical knowledge has been held up as an exemplary accomplishment of human reasoning and human intelligence. Central to that knowledge are proofs, demonstrations that certain mathematical statements are true. And for thousands of years, the work of producing those proofs has been a task belonging exclusively to human beings. But beginning in the 1950s, something new was introduced to the work of mathematics: the modern digital computer. Computers made possible new and exciting and powerful ways of proving theorems, but they also raised fundamental questions. Some computer proofs are too long for any person to actually read all the way through. Some make use of computational processes that are too complex for the human mind to easily apprehend and understand. Should these be considered proofs at all? Should we be convinced by them that something is true? What kind of knowledge is mathematical knowledge, and how is it transformed or unsettled or challenged by the introduction of computers as theorem provers? Questions like these have troubled mathematicians and philosophers since the inception of computer proof. And they are also of great interest to someone like me in the history of science, a discipline that seeks to understand how knowledge is made differently, and made possible in different times and places. However, I contend that before we can appreciate these questions fully, we have to go back in time. We have to understand what was actually involved in getting computers to prove theorems in the first place. We need a history. And to that end, I am writing a dissertation that is a historical account of the digital automation of proof in the United States. And the question that motivates me at the bottom of my project is this: what happened to mathematics when it was translated into the digital media of modern computing? How did early programmers and computer scientists reimagine and reformulate mathematics in order to make computer proof possible? And I propose that this story is, in large part, a material story. Traditionally, mathematics is characterized as dealing with highly abstract and immaterial things. But throughout history, mathematicians have formulated and explored those abstractions by way of tangible, visible, written, tactile material tools. They make use of things like diagrams, written symbol systems, physical models. These are designed to make abstract things like integrals and sets and numbers and logical propositions accessible to human faculties. They make them explorable by way of visual and tactile practices. But the automation of proof required that mathematics be made accessible instead to computers and their constituent digital media. Programmers had to deal with problems and materials that were quite foreign to the human experience of mathematics. The processes by which proofs are constructed had to be translated into algorithmic, rule-bound, electronic computational operations. And mathematical objects had to be reconfigured so that they could be input to a computer and stored and manipulated in its electromagnetic memory. And these digital materialities were very different from the human-oriented ones that preceded them. For example, in the 1950s, a new data structure called a linked list was developed to represent simple logical propositions to mainframe computers. Data structures are ways of organizing information in computer memory and a way of assigning meaning to the underlying bits. In a linked list, each element of a logical proposition is stored in a set of bits of computer memory. The elements don't need to be stored in the same physical place, however, because each one points to the address in memory of the next element. In this configuration, mathematical objects are physically distributed and intermingled with one another in the electromagnetic materials that constitute computer memory. Computers are amenable to this type of structure, but humans are not. Linked lists accommodate computers, not people. Today, computers are being used to help us make knowledge of all kinds, from mathematics to sociology. But we don't usually ask how they got there. We should. Transformations in disciplines were required in order to make collaboration with computers possible. And we think differently with computers. We reimagine the world through their limitations, their possibilities, and their material specificity, especially at the beginning. I study the history of automated theorem proving to understand transformations in knowledge and thinking that were made and made possible by computers. Thank you very much.
Our final speaker is Edgar Barroso from music, who will be speaking to us about enhancing music, social, and entrepreneurial innovation through transdisciplinary collaboration.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here. And I really, really, really love sound. When I first came to Harvard, I was very interested in how other fields of knowledge could inform my music. I wanted to learn it all. Social media, psychology, computer science. Soon to realize that I could not go deep enough in any of them. I was always on the surface. And this is when I learned one of the best lessons at Harvard, the power of knocking on doors and talking to people. So I took my scores, I walked across campus, and I started to ask for help to compose music. And the results were amazing. People helped me so much to write music. People from the physics department, people from the literature department. And at the same time, I was not entirely happy with the model. Because the model was, you guys help me do music. And I was looking for a much more collaborative approach where we all took advantage of these fields of knowledge that we all had. And this is when I discovered transdisciplinary collaboration, a collaboration that goes between, across, and beyond disciplines. At this moment, I was thinking of music as a transdisciplinary community builder. Let me give you an example. I had to write a piece called Bisbiglio for 6 instruments. And at this moment, I was puzzled by the question, why is it that modern Western music is most of the time transmitted through a written score? Most cultures still transmit music orally or by repetition. So in order to create a community around this idea, I invited 3 poets that I knew to invite 3 poets that I did not know. And I asked each one of them to write a poem for each one of the instruments. Then I invited 6 people that I knew from different fields of knowledge to become the whisperers. And instead of writing the score for the musicians, I wrote the scores for the whisperers. So I use the poems, I translate them into music instructions, and the whisperers will tell orally the music instructions to the musician on stage in real time. Now, go further. Imagine this same collaborative community working together not only for music purposes, but into something that we all agree it was important. We decided to do it with social programs. So we began with a very small project called Hands to Sound, where we went to foster homes in Mexico, and we basically taught little kids how to design and create sound effects, like the ones that you listen when you go to the movies. And this project evolved beyond music. It evolved into 60 Minutes for Mexico, a social movement where we challenge Mexican society to donate 60 minutes of their time every week. And the results were amazing. People helped each other very, very much. Help a friend, help a stranger, teach something. We are now more than 10,000 members, and we have presence in more than 10 cities in the country, and even now in Honduras. What I'm suggesting is that music is not only something that happens in beautiful theaters, such as this one, but it is also a great intersection, a great starting point for communities and institutions that are looking for transdisciplinary collaboration. Music could be seen as data, as math, as an acoustic phenomenon, but we all know that music is also passion, intuition, cognition. And it is precisely because of this diversity that music functions as a sort of glue of fields of knowledge. And this is relevant because it continues to create and co-create new music. It explores the question of how can we collaborate more and better. But most importantly, music brings us together. If we make an effort to collaborate more and better, I believe we will have better music, better science, and ultimately, better societies. Thank you very much.
Hearing all the applause and the cheering, I assume most of you think that we have had a great success. But at Harvard, we like to do scientific assessment. So now it's a time to have your honest and the scientific judgment of the quality of this presentation as a whole. In future years, we may do so by using some fancy electronic polling device. But for this inaugural year, we'll do it in a very traditional way. But you have to follow my instruction. That is, if you think the overall quality has exceeded your expectation, if you think that this is a really great, a grand success, clap your hands as hard as you can, as if you were going to hurt them. Like that. That hurt, actually. If you think the quality is just about average, then clap your hands gently, as if you just heard a dean's speech. And of course, if you don't think the program succeeded at all, keep your hands on iPhone or iPad or whatever device you have been fiddling with. Okay? You got my instruction? All right. So now let me invite all the 8 scholars to stand up and to receive their ultimate scientific appraisal. They just did it. Wow. I actually have to say something to stop this. This is more than I expected. Now, hearing the thunders of the applause at the dean of the GSS, with all the powers invested in me, I now declare the symposium a grand success. Since it is so successful, let me pose a question to the audience, particularly the students. Do you think it'd be wonderful to have similar program for the faculty and have them to have the similar trainings? Do you like that idea? I will pass on the suggestion to Dean Smith. Of course, events like this requires many resources to make them possible, let alone to be successful. It is therefore with great pleasure and gratitude that I introduce my dear friend, classmate, now colleague, Professor Stephen Blynes, to deliver the closing remarks. Stephen has generously established the Dean's Innovation Fund, which made it possible to offer this Horizon program, including the reception you're about to enjoy. But most importantly, Professor Bly's own experience showcased the tremendous talent of the GSS alumni and their impact on the world. After his PhD in statistics from GSS in 1992, Stephen started his career as a faculty member at the Imperial College London. He then took a detour to Wall Street, where he was a managing director at both Morgan Stanley and the Deutsche Bank, before he returned to Harvard as a senior leader of the Harvard Management Company. In case you don't know what the company is, that's the entity that makes us the world's most well-endowed university. Following his passion for pedagogy, Stephen also found time to teach one of the most popular and valuable courses at Harvard. That's a STAT 123, Applied Quantitative Finance, Applied Quantitative Finance on Wall Street. Apparently, I can't be on Wall Street. I can't even pronounce that correctly. If you ever want to take a detour to Wall Street, which I know many of you do, you literally cannot afford not to take that course. Today, Professor Blythe will tell you about the importance of communication skills on Wall Street. So let's welcome Professor Blythe.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here and see the Horizons program come to fruition. As Zhao Li mentioned, we were classmates together back in the early 1990s. We actually were co-authors on a paper together back then, and I think it's a good indication of our respective academic trajectories, and in particular Zhao Li's, that paper remains my most cited paper and Zhao Li's least cited paper. Anyway, I wanted to particularly thank Zhao Li for setting this up. Since we've both been back at Harvard for the last 6 or 7 years, we've spoken a lot about the importance of effective communication, and as chair of the statistics department, Zhao Li was relentless in stressing the importance to graduate students of being able to convey complex ideas in a clear, coherent, compelling, alliterative way. And so I'm really delighted to be able to support Zhao Li's efforts to bring those skills, that drive to the graduate school as a whole. As we know, communication skills are extremely important within academia, but they're equally important for PhD graduates who are pursuing careers outside the academy, where really one's effectiveness in a career is often closely linked to the ability to connect with and engage with and communicate with one's colleagues, the people who are working for you, your investors, the people you're working for. So institutions that look to hire some of our great students, biotech firms, IT firms, government, think tanks, industry, commerce, dare I say investment firms, want PhD students with ambition who will develop groundbreaking ideas. They don't want PhD students to dumb down their ideas in order to communicate them with others, but they do want PhDs who have the ability to articulate what they're doing, these groundbreaking, subtle, complex ideas, to the people around them. In my own career on finance, I've seen many talented PhDs flounder, sunk by their inability to engage and explain, like we've seen the great 8 Horizon scholars do today. I think it's important that the value of one's research should not be measured by how few people can understand it, but by the impact and influence it has on the world around. And I'm just so delighted to see 8 talks and 8 students who have that ability to communicate, and the impact it has both on the audience here and the broader world, I think, will be tremendous. So I just want to close the evening by thanking the scholars again, thanking Xiao Li and Professor Kuriyama for the idea that brings this great occasion. I just really hope that many of you will be back in years to come, and we'll have many cohorts of Horizon scholars in years into the future, and this event will become a regular feature for GSES and for Harvard as a whole. So thank you again very much. Yeah.
Thank you again, Stephen, for your generous help to make this program possible. Now let me invite the 8 scholars to the stage, because we're going to give them the scholar certificates. And at the same time, I'm going to invite their divisional deans and the school deans to present them with the certificate. So please join me to welcome to the stage first Professor Mike Smith, the Dean of Arts and Sciences, and Professor David Golan, the Dean for Graduate Education at Harvard Medical School, Professor Peter Marston, the Dean of Social Science at FS, and then Professor Deanna Sorensen, the Dean of Humanity at the FS. And so all the, I need to give that to you, and so you can distribute to them, okay? So let me invite them to here, if you can figure out who's who. That's a hard part for you. I'm just trying to see if they pay attention, you know, to figure out who's who. Okay, now go ahead. Thank you. That was just trying to remind my fellow deans that it's not easy to be a dean. You have to remember who's who. So please, now you can step back. Now, let me invite Stephanie Dick, who was chosen by the scholars to represent them and to provide a summary of their experience, which I certainly hope was a very positive one. So let's welcome Stephanie.
Hi again. So I have the very great honor of representing the first cohort of Harvard Horizon Scholars in thanking the great number of people that really made this experience both a reality and a wonderful one for all of us. I'd first like to thank all of you again for coming. I hope you enjoyed hearing about our work as much as we enjoyed preparing to talk with you about it. I'd also like to thank the 7 people standing to my right. We have truly bonded as colleagues and have become invested in each other's work in a way that is still very uncommon across disciplinary boundaries. I'm really excited to count all of them as friends as we move forward in our academic careers. I would also like to thank, on behalf of all of us, Dean Xiaoli Meng and Professor Hisa Koriyama for imagining this project and making it a reality. I think it represents a sincere investment in graduate students and their work. And it has really helped us all to understand our projects better and equipped us better to talk about them. I encourage all of our peers in the graduate school to apply for this program in the future. It has been a truly invaluable experience. I would also like to thank as well Professor Stephen Blythe, whose generosity made all of these events possible. And throughout our training and development sessions, a number of people with very specialized and very valuable skill sets helped us to hone our presentation skills and our visual skills. And I'd like to thank in particular Sarah Jessup from the Bach Center, Marlon from the Bach Center, and their other tireless volunteers for helping us with our speaking and our visuals. I'd like to thank Professor Rob Moss and Ellen Cates, who also consulted on those elements of our presentations. We wanted to thank Barry Walsh and Cassandra Nelson, who helped to organize and make everything happen along the way and were thoughtful interlocutors for us throughout the process. And finally, we'd like to thank Margot Gill from GSAS. She is an unparalleled advocate for graduate students as a collective and as individuals. But last, there are two people in particular that we would like to thank especially. They've been with us every week watching our talks over and over, reading our scripts and looking at our visuals and thinking with us about our projects. They created a totally congenial and supportive environment, and we felt that they invested in us without holding anything back as scholars and as colleagues and as people. So we would ask, please, that Laura Fromm from the Department of Visual and Environmental Studies and Pamela Pollock from the Bach Center please come up here. We can't thank you enough.
Wow, this is so nice. This part, I had no idea. This is truly the students' initiative, so it's really terrific. I do still have more people to thank, but I want to thank all the scholars again, but this time, together with the thanks to all their family members, the friends who are here, who are supporting them during this 6 weeks intensive period. And so let's give them, as well as all the friends, families here. Well, they shouldn't put my name down there. Okay. Well, this is now my last job is to thank everyone, as I would very much like to do. We'd like to thank all of those who have worked tirelessly to make today's symposium possible. This includes all members of the Faculty Selection Committee, which probably is already gone, and most of them were also members of the Graduate Policy Committee, the GSS team, particularly Barry Welsh and Cassandra Nelson, under the leadership of Dean Margot Gill. The scholar training staff led by Professor Laura Fromm and Pamela Pollock from the Bach Center, they were just being honored, and the wonderful film crew led by Marlon Kuzmik of the Bach Center. And let's give them all of them a big round of applause again. Don't worry, I'm still watching my time. It's not going to exceed 5 minutes. Last but not the least, our sincere thanks goes to all the applicants, as well as their advisors and the department chairs, for making this first annual program as competitive as anyone could have hoped. We hope to see even more applications in future years as we work to create cohorts of Horizon scholars who will help to further enhance Harvard's reputation for producing some of the world's most innovative and inspirational graduates. To conclude, I hope this symposium has provided you much food for thought, research-wise as well as pedagogically. It is now time for the food for stomach. Though to keep the 5 minutes theme of the symposium, I hope you don't eat anything more than 5 minutes in order to leave ample time to mingle with the scholars as well as with each other, which is one of the most important goals of this initiative. And to all the students, work hard on your research, sharpen your communication skills so you can have your 5 minutes fame in one of the future years here. And thanks for all for coming, and see you at the reception.